Life in the ocean. Now that we've talked about what the ocean is made of and all the different ocean floor features that you might see, we are going to talk about the types of marine life that you might find in the ocean. We're not only going to talk about the marine life, but also the different zones of the ocean. So the first type of marine life that you'll hear about is plankton. Plankton are tiny microscopic organisms that either float or drift near the surface. They really don't move on their own. Some examples of plankton are phytoplankton, which are kind of plant-like, and zooplankton, which are animal-like. Now, I know in the picture you see a plankton from SpongeBob, but he's not really what we're talking about. The next type of marine life are the nekton. These are the organisms that can swim freely in the open ocean. Unlike plankton that move around in the currents, nekton can decide where they want to go. Some examples would be whales, dolphins, sharks, sea lions, basically any kind of fish you can think of. Last but not least are the benthos. These are the bottom dwellers. They are the organisms that live on or in the ocean floor. Benthos can't really move around freely. They're not like nekton or plankton. They have to attach to things. They might crawl or scurry or kind of even like suction cup to the coral. Some examples of benthos might be crabs, starfish, worms, coral, and sponges. The benthos can be found anywhere from the seashore, and you may have seen crabs and things like that when you're at the beach, all the way to the hadal zone in the trenches. There are two main environments of the ocean, the benthic and the pelagic. Now, these are not actually zones, but environments. Benthic, you can think of the benthos. This is on the bottom, so B for bottom. Benthic environment is the region near the ocean floor and all the organisms that live on or in it. This could be anywhere, on the shore, all along the continental shelf, the slope, the abyssal plain, the trenches, like anywhere along a mid-ocean ridge, anywhere that's on the bottom. And the pelagic environment is basically everywhere else, so either near the surface or at middle depths. So now here's where it can get a little tricky, and you've got some practicing to do. The two environments are then broken down into zones. The benthic environment, so the bottom environment, is broken down into 5 zones. These would be the intertidal zone, the sublittoral zone, bathyal zone, abyssal zone, and hadal zone. In the past, my students and I have always practiced this as ISBA or BISBA, benthic, intertidal, sublittoral, bathyal, abyssal, hadal. Then the pelagic zone is kind of simple. It just has 2 zones, the pelagic environment. It has the neritic zone and the oceanic zone. And that's easy. You could just remember NO or PNO, pelagic, neritic, oceanic. Alright, so here's the first zone of the benthic environment. It's called the intertidal zone. And inter means between. You know, think about like the interstate, which would take you between states, maybe from Georgia to Florida. That sounds good right about now. I'd like to go to the beach. So intertidal means between the tides. It's between the high tide line and the low tide line. It is, in the picture, it's the area with like the dark red marker on it. So what's interesting about this zone is that things sometimes that live there are covered in water and sometimes they're not. things that you've seen, like the little crabs that crawl around on the beach. The next zone of the benthic environment is the sublittoral zone. This begins at the end of the intertidal zone. So it's from the low tide line, like wherever the low tide would go to, all the way down the shelf to where the slope begins. You can see this highlighted by the turquoise kind of color. After the sublittoral zone comes the bathyal zone. This is all along the continental slope, from the end of the shelf down to the abyssal plain. Then you've got the abyssal zone of the benthic environment. This would be all along the abyssal plain. Now down here there's very little sunlight, pretty much no sunlight at all. So there's not going to be many plants and very few animals. This is down in the deep, dark abyss of the ocean. The hadal zone can be found in the trenches. As shown in the picture, the turquoise color is all along the floor of the ocean trenches. So it doesn't have to be just all the way at the bottom of the trench, but all around it. Not many organisms live there at all. If you recall from class when we watched the clips about James Cameron's mission, he talks about how there are some organisms, but they're very rare. And there might be more that we don't even know about yet. Now we're going to get away from the bottom of the ocean and we're out of the benthic environment. We are now going to talk about the pelagic environment. We'll start with the neritic zone. The neritic zone is everywhere above the continental shelf. And even though this is so small, like look at the picture, it's just yellow, the yellow area. The pink area is much larger, but the largest concentration of marine life actually live in the yellow area. That is because there is more sunlight here than in any of the other ocean zones. So think about the movie Finding Nemo, when they're all swimming along and Nemo and his friends are with Mr. Ray, and all that pretty, all the coral and all the sea life that's there, that's all in the neritic zone. Please ignore that bell. That was not for you guys. Now, the second zone of the pelagic environment is much larger than the neritic, but also can be a lot darker. This is everywhere beyond the continental shelf. So in Finding Nemo, this is where the drop-off is, where Nemo's not supposed to go when they challenge him to go touch the butt or the boat, and he says he's not scared. Many organisms live in the upper regions of the oceanic zone, but strange creatures live further below. There's not really a whole lot past certain depths because there's not sunlight. This image is a more detailed picture of the zones. You can see all the ones that we talked about in the benthic environment, the sublittoral, bathyal, abyssal, hadal, and so on. But the ones in the pelagic environment, we don't really talk about a whole lot, like the epipelagic, mesopelagic. You may recall, though, when Mr. Ray is taking his class out over the continental shelf in Finding Nemo, he sings a song about the zones. Oh, let's name the zones of the sea. So those are the zones that he's singing about there. Here's another great picture showing the zones. You can see the benthic environment, and they call it the benthic zone, but it's really the environment, the whole bottom. And you can also see the pelagic environment. Take a second and study this diagram. Here are some important facts to remember about the ocean. We've talked about these quite a bit, but let's make sure we understand. In the ocean, the further you go down, the sunlight decreases, the temperature decreases, and the amount of life decreases. Probably because of the sunlight and temperature decrease. But the pressure increases. Why do you think this is so? Remember in the James Cameron video, he talks about how many pounds of pressure are on him as he goes down, and that his capsule that he's in actually shrinks. Remember the human pyramid? At the top, you would have the least amount of pressure because there's less water on top of you. This would be like the surface of the ocean. The further you go down at the bottom, there would be more pressure. Look at those people down there and look at all the pressure they have on top of them. That would be like being at the bottom of the ocean.
To see some things that live in the ocean, the Phoenix drags a net along the bottom of Long Island Sound.
Oh, let me hear you! Better!
The students then help pull in the net.
Let's start off with this guy. He's the most familiar.
Horseshoe
crab.
Oh,
Okay, everybody agrees? Horseshoe crab?
Yeah.
This animal's got two names, okay? Horseshoe crab, it's also known as a king crab. Okay?
Why is it called king?
It's just another name they've given it. I don't know, because they get pretty big, maybe. And the tail, there's no stinger on the tail or anything. But say you were to be walking along the bottom, you'd accidentally step on them. Look at these burrs on his carapace. See all these burrs? That would feel like a sting, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Also on the tail, look how the burrs go up. See how they're all oriented in one way? So if you were to step down, you would end up with a nice laceration on your leg.
Horseshoe crabs and all other kinds of animals that live on the ocean bottom are members of a group called benthos. The bottom is called the benthic layer of the ocean. Another group of marine organisms are called nekton. These swim freely through the water. Among the nekton are thousands of different species of fish, sea turtles, and mammals like whales and dolphin.
A third group that lives in the oceans are plankton, living things that simply float or drift wherever the waves or currents take them. Many kinds of plankton are plants and animals too small to be seen by the naked eye. But they can be gathered using special plankton nets. This jar of water contains thousands of plankton. With the help of a microscope, you can see an incredible diversity of these tiny ocean dwellers. Some are called phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are plant plankton. The most abundant are diatoms, whose unusual shapes come from the glass-like boxes in which their cells are encased. Looking like Christmas ornaments, diatoms come in a variety of shapes. Phytoplankton get their green color from structures inside their cells called chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are responsible for photosynthesis, the process through which plants produce oxygen. Phytoplankton produce more oxygen than all the Earth's trees and forests combined. In fact, over half the oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere was made by phytoplankton floating on or near the surface of the oceans. Phytoplankton are important for other reasons. They are the main food for animal plankton or zooplankton. The zooplankton, in turn, are eaten by many other kinds of marine animals, from tiny fish to baleen whales. Without plankton, most kinds of marine life would starve and become extinct.
Plankton and most other kinds of marine life exist in the top layer of the water, within a few meters of its surface. This layer gets the most light and heat from the sun. But light from the sun's rays decreases rapidly as you go deeper into the ocean water. Most of the ocean, in fact, is totally dark. As you descend into the ocean, the water temperature also becomes colder. And there's another change that occurs the deeper into the ocean you go. The pressure of the water increases rapidly with depth.
A simple experiment demonstrates the effects of water depth on pressure.